Ray, we live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another fisheries industry conversation. So this is our third conversation we're having. Previous two conversations was quite valuable for me. I learned quite a lot. And the reason why I'm doing this is, it's just a very important year for the fishing industry. We're up for massive fishing rights application process. And also, there is just a lot of conversation to have about the fishing industry. We've got a big fishing industry. I mention it in every interview that the fishing industry employs quite a lot of people, contributes to the GDP of South Africa. It's also in areas where there's not a lot of employment. So the fishing companies on the West Coast employ a lot of people, and they not only employ the people, they employ also they provide for the families. So I decided this week that we're going to chat a bit about the small-scale fishing. So what the small-scale fishing is, it's of course not the commercial type of fishing. It's not the recreational type of fishing, but it's basically the fishing that is done with communities that live at the sea. And one of the people that was very strong and vocal about small-scale fishing in South Africa is Pedro Garcia. Of course, Pedro represents the Small Scale Fishing Association, the South African United Fishing Front. He's the chairperson. And he's been involved with small scale fishing for a very, very long time. And I just thought he's probably the best person to speak to regarding small scale fishing in South Africa, purely for educational purposes, purely so people can understand what small scale fishing is. So, Pedro, thank you so much for your time tonight. Are you well?
Yeah, thank you very much, Miles, and thank you for having me on the show. It's a privilege to be here. We have a lot of issues to talk about, a lot of challenges. Small scale is definitely an important year, but every year that the small scale has missed out has been an important year. So, I'm ready.
Yeah, definitely. So before we get into the real nuts and bolts of the conversation, why is Pedro Garcia in fishing?
Look, I've had one brother who was a commercial fisherman. He lost his right in a very unfair manner. My other brothers were in the Navy. My father was in the Royal Navy. So the sea has always been part of our life. I've used the fishing sector as a primary source of income on many occasions, harvesting on lionfish vessels and also harvesting West Coast rock lobster. But what had led to the creation of the South African United Fishing Front in the early 2000s, I did a project with the National Skills Foundation where we did training of the small-scale fishers. That was the pre-seas and small boats training. And I worked from Alexander Bay all across the coastline, right up to KwaZulu-Natal, but we had excluded the Eastern Cape at that time. And on average, I had spent about 3 to 4 weeks in each community. And the insight that I got and the experience I gleaned from those communities, when I had completed the training, I immediately decided that it is time for an organization not just to represent the small-scale fishers, but also to be a voice, a conduit for our small-scale fishers, given the plight they were facing at that time already.
Okay, perfect. So I mean, just by introduction, of course, small-scale fishers, for those that are listening, small-scale fishing sector was only recognized very recently in South African law. And that, of course, gave light to giving fishing, small-scale fishers rights for a certain amount of years. And we are also currently in a process of giving fishing industry, the small-scale fishing industry, the rights. Most of the provinces received their small-scale rights. So it's just the Western Cape. So Pedro, explain to someone that does not know what small-scale fishing sector is in South Africa. Give someone a definition of what small-scale fishing is in South Africa.
Small-scale fishing is defined as fishers who use what they call passive gear, um, small boats. They're not commercialized or industrialized, um, and it's basically the fishing communities along our coastline. Um, but I think maybe we should get into the nitty gritty of what the small scale fisheries policy really is and what it's doing in our country right now. As much as there is a hype about our fishers having rights, what our fishers are sitting with at the moment is basically a certificate that gives them the right to fish. The right to fish must still be applied for. That is how the system works. How it basically unfolds is that there's an identification and verification process which had taken place. Then, once the fishes have been identified, if they meet the criteria, then they are put together into a cooperative. The cooperative must then be established between DAF and DTI. Once that is done, then there's a training period, a two-day training program to give the fishers a better idea or understanding of what the small scale policy and what the regulations are all about. Now, this is also when the small scale fishing regulations kick in. Now, I'm convinced that a lot of our people really don't understand the small scale fishing regulations and how it impacts on their livelihoods and how it will impact on their livelihoods. One of the reasons why we are concerned about the FRAP process is in the Western Cape in particular. The Western Cape has not as yet been, the cooperatives have not been established in the Western Cape. This is a huge problem. It's a problem in the sense that the Western Cape is one of the provinces that had some of the biggest problems with the identification and verification process. There was an audit done. We are still waiting for the outcome of that audit. It was commissioned by the minister. Now, until we get the report from the minister and what the way forward is, it's going to be difficult to say yay or nay to the people who are currently on the small scale fishing list. Because remember, in the Western Cape, you are also dealing with what is known as interim relief. Interim relief was granted by the Equality Court. And the court order is very specific. It states that until a small scale fisheries policy, which makes economic sense, is fully implemented, the interim relief court order will remain in place. So now in the Western Cape, we are torn between what is going to happen. We're waiting for DAF to come back to us now to tell us, is this new season going to be interim relief or is it going to be small scale? Now, in the absence of those reports that we're supposed to get from the minister, there is so much uncertainty. Now, we understand that there are huge shortcomings within the department, but we also understand that the small scale fisheries policy is what we have now. It is what it is. And from our side, we need to make it work. So we need to take government's hand and say, look, we understand you've got problems. There's definitely capacity problems. Nobody can deny that. You look at the amount of people, you can count them on your hand, who are responsible not just for implementing, but also to guide and assist in terms of rights allocations, in terms of the developmental component of the policy. And you're talking about over 10,000 people. 8 people simply cannot do it. And we need to acknowledge those shortcomings within the department, and we need to address it. Whether it is through assistance from civil society or assistance from the fishing associations, it simply needs to be done. If you take the Western Cape, the reason why we are concerned about FRAP, there was a proposal was gazetted in terms of the resources split. That proposal was withdrawn by Minister Garcia. The understanding was that she would retable that resources split proposal. The resources split is extremely important. We know that we do not have enough resources to make economic sense within the small-scale fisheries policy. In other words, for the small-scale fishing cooperatives. So we need of these rights which are expiring now. But we need to address this before FRAP gets into full swing. Because if a portion of these rights must be allocated to the small-scale fishing cooperatives, it needs to be done before anything is finalized within the FRAP process. Because once the FRAP process is finalized, we don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of getting those resources into the communities. If that happens, and we do not have enough resources available, then we're setting our people up for failure. Just looking at the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, now we understand that COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact. As a matter of fact, with the small-scale fishers, it was even worse. Our markets collapsed 2 months before the lockdown, and primarily because the bulk of our high-value species is exported to China. China closed their doors. Our markets collapsed. When we eventually did see some form of recovery, we couldn't sell our products in South Africa, especially the West Coast rock lobster, because in South Africa, the West Coast rock lobster is still listed red on the SASSI list. So our communities have been damned since day one of this season. At the moment, we don't know what the value is of the resources our people have at their disposal. I'm talking about the current season now. And our people have been sitting with absolutely nothing. Zilch. We've been fighting with marketers, we've been fighting with the big companies, but we also understand that they too have been impacted by COVID-19. So we're sitting in a situation where we need to talk, and we need to talk very urgently, not just with the department, but with the minister as well. The one advantage that we do have as civil society is we come through a range of decision makers, ministers, DDGs, DGs, directors, fisheries directors. We were there since Tobacco Batela was there, Sandile Sabia was there, Craig Smith was there, and we still here. We were there when Martinez van Skalkwyk was there, Tina Jumet was there, Zokwana was there. And every decision maker had, for some reason or other, thought that they would leave a legacy in terms of the small-scale fishers. None of them has left a legacy. The only legacy that's out there now is the suffering and the cesspool in which our communities currently exist, because they do not have access to resources. And even if they do have the access to resources, we are not fully capacitated to optimally utilize those resources. Our communities remain at the bottom end of the value chain. The high end of the value chain is still monopolized and manipulated by larger companies and marketers. So whatever we do with the small-scale fisheries policy, we need to, number one, ensure that we have sufficient resources so that we do not set our people up for failure. Number two, the capacity that is needed to optimally utilize those resources needs to go into high gear right now. Otherwise, we sit with a problem. As a matter of fact, last year, when the Eastern Cape started getting their certificates of rights of fishing rights, the big companies were already running and almost separating the directors and getting them to sign for the squid. All right, sign over the resources without the knowledge of the people that's in the cooperatives. And that type of behavior is going to take place here in the Western Cape as well. We need to protect our people. The department needs to protect our people. We cannot continually say that we are dealing with a developmental policy, but we don't offer that degree of protection. The two goes hand in glove. There's no doubt about it. So
Pedro,
we are sitting with huge challenges at this point in time.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, so, I mean, you mentioned a few things, and I think for people that don't understand the language, I just want to just go back a bit. So just explain to me two things. Okay, maybe three things. One, what is a cooperative? How is it formed? Is it a minimum? Is it a minimum amount of people? Must you be in an area to be part of a cooperative? Number one. Number two is the 2-day training that you get as a cooperative. What does that entail? Is it what skills? Is it soft skills? Is it management skills? Is it finance skills? What skills are given to you in that 2-day training? And number three, why out of all the provinces is it only Western Cape that had an audit and only Western Cape that has not had its rights issued yet? Just those three questions quickly.
All right. Let's start with the cooperatives and how it's formed. The cooperatives form part of the small-scale policy, the implementation plan, and the small-scale fishing regulations. Those are all documents that guides the process. Cooperatives are formed with the people who have been identified and verified by the department. And only on that basis can it happen. According to the small-scale fishing regulations, a minimum of 5 people can form a cooperative. But there is also a disjuncture there, because what DAF is saying at the moment to our people and what the regulations are saying seems to be two different things. So it's a challenge that we need to address. In terms of skills, yes, soft skills are required, but soft skills needs to be transferred to our people in a format that they understand. So we need to look at the local dynamics. What are the literacy levels? What type of education needs to take place? Or what form of education needs to take place? Must it be visual? Must it be oral? Given the fact that we are dealing with a lot of people who are not literate. So all of those things must be taken into account. The 2 days I cannot accept. As a matter of fact, I don't think South can accept that you can transform a fisherman into an entrepreneur within 2 days. There needs to be much more skills development, training, leadership training, especially, so that we have institutional capacity at the grassroots level. That is one of the greatest vacuums, the institutional capacity, because if we have that, it can then act something similar to an extension office where people are always guided and protected. The one thing that the policy does do, it does protect our people. It's not all doom and gloom when it comes to the policy, but there are a lot of things that needs to be discussed before we can really move forward in this regard. And then just on the last one, can you just repeat that again? I
just wanted to find out why out of all the provinces is Western Cape the one that has not been issued rights? And were there audits done on all the other provinces, or was it only for Western Cape?
Honestly, I cannot say whether the audit was national. I believe that the audit may have been confined to the Western Cape. Why the Western Cape was left for last? I think it's obvious. In the past, 80% of the fishing industry was concentrated in the Western Cape, whether it was, through vessels or processing plants or whatever the case may be. So the Western Cape also became the more contentious area when it comes to fishing rights, and also the more vocal one, because people have been heavily involved in the industry for generations.
Okay. And then just quickly, before we carry on, what do small scale fishers catch? What's the resources available? What can they? What they're allowed to catch?
Okay, now we must understand we're talking about the small scale fisheries policy. All right. Under the small scale fisheries policy, there are actually two options, or not two options. Yeah, they've got two, let's call it two streams. The first one being that they can apply for the right to harvest resources which are near shore, that they will harvest from the shoreline, but that will be for consumption purposes. And this is where the small scale fisheries policy differ from the others. Okay, and then they will have the right to apply for resources which they can use on a commercial basis. For argument's sake, West Coast rock lobster, squid, those will all go into the commercial basket of the small-scale fishing cooperatives. So depending on the resources which is available in the area, they can then apply, because remember, there's still an application process. Once the cooperative is established, it doesn't mean that they have the rights immediately. They only get the rights once they apply for the rights. And then there's a long list of documents they still need to prepare and to submit to DAF before they can start allocating the rights that they are requesting. And you're not going to get a yes for every request that you put in, because you're dealing with more than one cooperative, and you could be dealing with a number of cooperatives in one particular area. And there's a mechanism for conflict resolution, which is also built into the constitution of the cooperatives, which comes as part and parcel of the small-scale fishing regulations.
Okay, perfect. So let's chat a bit about FRAP. So FRAP 2020 is coming up. We within 1 month's time, the official date, 14th October, is commencing. What is our United Fishing Front's view on FRAP currently in the current state? We also touched on previously that there was a gazette that the squid or some of the resources are going to be split 50-50. Then it was the gazette was then withdrawn. Let's chat a bit about FRAP and how small-scale fishers want to be involved in FRAP, because we have this conversation of high deep sea being very expensive, high capital requirements. Is high deep sea a species that would fit for small-scale fishers? Or are there specific species that fit for small-scale fishers?
This is a balancing act that government has to take up now. Every species, any South African citizen or entity can apply under the FRAP processes. Make no mistake about that. But under the small-scale fishing regulations, persons who are involved in a cooperative or a part of a cooperative cannot apply under FRAP. It's a bit problematic. It doesn't say that the small-scale cooperative itself cannot apply. So there's a bit of ambiguity in terms of what they can and cannot do. But let me put it to you this way. South Africa, we talk about transformation and constitutional imperatives all the time. Within the fishing industry, there really hasn't been that much transformation. It's all been a smokescreen all along. You might have the resource, but at the end of the day, you're the one that walks away with the least, because it is manipulated and it is manipulated, and it is the marketers and it's the big companies who enjoy the benefits and who live the lavish lifestyle. We understand what the circumstances are and we understand what the conditions are. But what we need to do is, if we see that we cannot provide a basket of species which is going to make economic sense to the small-scale fishing cooperatives, then surely we must be able to give them the right to apply for offshore rights, even if they don't have the equipment, even if they don't have the business know-how of managing that. There are literally hundreds of paper quotas out there at this point in time. If we can get part of the offshore that can at least sustain the cooperative in the first, let's say, 5 years, it will give the cooperative an opportunity to build itself. And after a set period of time, they can then start accessing the resources themselves, because then they can access the vessels, they can access the equipment, the processing plants. It's a phased-in process, but it requires, the fundamental requirement in this whole process is that when the small-scale cooperatives start, we need to be able to say there is economic viability. And if that economic viability means that we need to access part of the offshore resources, then that is how it should be.
So, and I mean, you touching on you're touching on a word that's been popping up a lot, is this economic viable quota. So what is your view of someone that gets high deep sea and they only get 200 tons? Is that a viable quota? Would a small scale cooperative be able to, survive on a 200-ton quota for a deep sea?
Miles, what we are talking about is a basket of species. So what I am saying is that if we look at the resources we have at our disposal, and we know our resources are under pressure, we understand that, all right? We need to break it down so that we put a basket of species together. And if that basket of species have to include an income from an offshore right to sustain the cooperative, then that is how it should be done. But we simply cannot afford to put small-scale cooperatives into place, knowing full well that what we are doing is we're dooming them to failure, because we know we don't have enough resources. So you look at it this way: when our fishers start now with the small-scale fishing cooperatives, they are already sitting with a cost structure. We can jump up and down and we can say, we got a cooperative. That cooperative, because it's a legal entity, it now costs us money. So we're starting off on a negative. We simply cannot afford that. We need to ensure that all our costs are covered before we put these things into motion. And they need the support, they need the guidance, they need the mentorship. We need to acknowledge and we need to accept that as well.
So if we look at FRAP 2021 now, we're looking at 12 sectors that are up for renewal. So for those that don't know, we have 12 sectors that get the government, it expires to a certain extent, and it goes back to government. Government then has to reallocate all 12 of these species. And I just wanted to find out from you, Pedro, I don't know if you have the list of the 12, but what are the species, would you say all 12 could fit in a basket of species for the small-scale fisher?
Look, the offshore species, which are capital intensive, which needs experience and expertise, which we don't have, one has to look at if it's necessary to access that on the basis where we're saying that we have an offshore right, but we're having somebody else doing it for us. We have catching agreements, we have marketing agreements, but during the course of having that right, we must also then ensure that our people have access to those type of operations. They need to be able to shadow the people who are currently running these operations. Of the 12 species, some that can almost form an immediate part of the small scale would be things like small pelagics. Why don't our communities have access to sardine, anchovy, red eye? And we have small vessels available that can do side trawling. If each cooperative has a side trawl vessel, they can use it for other purposes as well. So when there is small pelagic, the season is open, they can go out, they can harvest these small pelagic. It's a source of proteins that is essential to the growth of our young people and our children. And we don't have access to it. Everything gets converted into fish meal to go and feed the chickens and the pigs and God knows what else. What about our people? We need access to small pelagics. South Coast rock lobster, that's questionable. Like longline, I think that would fall in the category where we're saying we need to learn, but you shouldn't exclude us from the process. There's no reason why you can't add a portion of that so that we can sustain our cooperative during the startup period. Squid, that is already been granted. We still don't know exactly what amount. Our boys in the Eastern Cape are completely confused. The mussel shark, that's questionable. Traditional lionfish, it's supposed to be a 50-50 split. We don't know how far we're getting with that. KwaZulu-Natal, the prawn trawl, there's a possibility that we could also have our people in KZN having access to that type of resource. And then the tuna pole is just as accessible to our people. I don't see why we cannot access part of that during the FRAP process. Hake handline has been controversial. It still is controversial. It's only concentrated in a certain area, yet people on the other side of South Africa are sitting with rights. Or people who are 300-400 kilometers away from where the resource actually occurs are sitting with these rights. So Hake Handline has been a bit of it's been a bit of a stepchild, let's put it that way, since the last FRAP processes.
Yeah.
Oysters, we're assuming that oysters is going to form 100% of the basket, as is white mussel. We don't know. We'll only hear, because the resources split must be discussed. The one other sore point that is now appearing in the small-scale fishing regulations is that small-scale fishers don't have access to abalone. That is problematic. And I think it's an issue that we seriously need to take up with the ministry and with the department.
So that, Pedro, why is that with the abalone? I mean, because abalone is near shore. Why is it? Why would they include that?
Why would they include it or exclude
it?
Why
would they say no? Why would they say it is not accessible for small-scale fishers if it is a near-shore species?
Look, everybody knows that abalone is a very controversial topic. All right, but that doesn't mean that we should be excluded from the processes. If we look at the small-scale fisheries policy, and the areas are demarcated as per the small-scale fisheries policy, which the minister is supposed to do, it is almost a guarantee that our people living in close proximity to the resource are also going to protect that resource in the knowledge that that is a form of generational equity. They have to preserve for future generations, and they have to preserve for the sake of the resource itself. So there are a lot of issues around that particular species that needs to be taken into account before a blanket decision is made in terms of withdrawing it from the small-scale fishing basket of species.
Pedro, and then I also wanted to ask you a bit about what is your view about new entrants in a sector, taking away from big companies that employ, that also invest. How do you mentioned a nice word, it's a balancing act. In the ideal world, how do you see it happen?
Look, we made recommendations a while ago, a couple of years ago already, when the FRAP processes started, even with the small-scale fisheries as well, because with the small-scale fisheries, it became extremely contentious with all the new entrants, especially in the interim relief. But we South Africans, we need to make provision for new entrants. I think the way we went about it is most probably a bit problematic. What we had suggested then was to say, take 80% of the resources which are becoming available and let the established fishers and the established companies, let them battle it out. And let's see who meets the criteria, who has invested, who has created jobs. Let them benefit from it.
Pedro, you there? It looks like, sorry, we're just waiting for Pedro to come back. I think it's probably his connection just disappeared quickly. Yeah, for those of you who are joining, we're speaking to Pedro Garcia. Of course, Pedro is the chairperson of South Africa's United Fishing Front. They look after the interests of the small-scale fishing. And we're just chatting a bit about small-scale fishing in South Africa. We're chatting about FRAP 2020, 2021, and where does the small-scale fishers see their presence within FRAP 20. Pedro, wait, let's just wait for him to return. Yeah, we probably also towards the end of our conversation. I mean, like I said, this is purely a awareness education platform. We'll be learning a bit about the different sectors. Pedro, of course, is from the small scale fishers. We were just touching on about which of the small scale fishing communities receive their rights. Those of you that don't know, most of the provinces receive their small scale fishing rights for 15 years. The Western Cape is the only province that is outstanding. And I think like in the latest news in the latest newspapers, it was said that it might happen this year. But of course, there was an audit done your returns. There was an audit done. Let me just see. Pedro, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back here.
I nearly wanted to say Pedro's gone fishing. Sorry. You were just chatting a bit about just making your recommendation for newcomers into taking from the big companies, saying that rather give your view is rather let the companies that employ and that have invested over the years enjoy, rights, and the ones that have not performed and the paper quota holders, they must lose their rights. Is that correct?
Something like that, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But Miles, we've got to be very careful how we go forward here. The issue with the new entrants, it's not just about transformation or getting new entrants into the industry, which is a critical factor. But there's a huge safety component here as well, because whatever happens, you see, if you know who the new entrants are and people are accepted into the industry, then it is you find a better, they gel better then with the older folk that's in the industry, and they will be shown, they'll be guided and stuff like that. But if people are foisted upon you, and the old fishermen, they're very reluctant to assist with the new ones. If you have a system that's acceptable to all in terms of the allocation of rights between existing rights holders and new entrants, then you will have a better understanding, and people will be more accommodative in terms of imparting with that knowledge of safety and security at sea.
Pedro, I think we towards the end. Is there a sense of positivity amongst the small scale fishing in Western Cape with allocations coming forward? What's the feeling in Western Cape, and what is the reaction of the other provinces that receive their rights with the cooperatives? Is it working?
Look, it's going to be extremely difficult. Let's start with the other provinces first. It's going to be extremely difficult to say whether it's working or not, given the situation that we find ourselves in with COVID. The fact that our markets have collapsed, and the fact that our people are sitting with basically nothing. Their supply chains has all but collapsed. The Western Cape, there are very contentious issues still. We need to know from the department, where are we going this year? Is it still going to be interim relief? Is the small scale going to be rolled out? And if it's going to be rolled out, is there enough time? Are you going to pilot it? And if you pilot it, what happens then to the court order in terms of the interim relief? So there are a lot of unanswered questions. We want to remain positive about this, because we believe that if there's a fair dispensation coming from the small-scale fishing policy, together with resources that are coming from FRAP, to create something which makes economic sense to our people, we are going to put everything in it to make sure that we can be successful in the communities where we do represent fishers. We don't represent everybody. I'm here, I represent our constituents. But these are some of the issues that needs to be delved in, that needs to be talked about, but it needs to be talked about now, because the next season is almost upon us, and FRAP is almost upon us. We cannot wait for the department to decide, we're going to let you know at the 11th hour, because that seems to be a modus operandi within the department as well. We haven't got a problem working with the department, but we also need to understand that we have constituents whose livelihoods depend upon what the department decides and how we move forward.
Yeah. And then lastly, I mean, I know, like when I read up a bit about the small scale fishers, and of my experience is that we have smaller communities, Honaklabai, Doringbai. Would the cooperative thing mean that Wonnaklabai as a community, you get a cooperative formed, minimum 5 people, and is there a limit? So if there are 100 people living there, can all of them apply for cooperative? How's it managed?
Look, once again, if you've gone through the registration and verification process, then you automatically become part of the cooperative or a cooperative within a certain area. Wonnaklabai and Port Nolloth are the two cooperatives in the Northern Cape. They've been functional, or let's say they are functional. How successful they are, we all need that. We need to decide for ourselves. But nonetheless, they are operational. The same in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. They are, for all intent and purposes, these cooperatives are supposed to be operational at this point in time. It is just the Western Cape where we still need to address the issue of establishing the cooperatives. But prior to that, we need to know what the outcomes are of the audit that was commissioned by the minister, so that the department can know who the people are that are now truly identified, and can the decisions then be appealed in terms of the people who are on the list or not. So those are some of the issues that we need to deal with as well.
Okay, perfect. Pedro, I mean, I don't have any more questions on the small scale. I think it was quite informative from knowing what small scale is and where we are now. Any last words for you? Of course, we mentioned it's 1 month before FRAP starts. Any outgoing words from you or your organization?
Look, SALV doesn't just deal with the marine sector. We also deal with aquaculture and the inland fisheries. Inland fisheries has been completely ignored. There has been no attempt made to approach the inland fishers. They've been going through the same problems as the marine sector as well. There is a draft policy which is now on its way to NEDLAC for the inland fisheries. We just feel that the minister and the department needs to give a bit more of attention to the inland fishery sector, because it can become a viable option for thousands of people. The difference between the inland fisheries and the marine sector is that in the inland fisheries, you can look at restocking programs where you have hatcheries that restock rivers, lakes, dams. So people will always have access to resources. And these are some of the issues that are still just hanging there. But we are hopeful that the department will, at the end of the day, realize that small-scale operators are not just in the marine sector. They are in the inland fishery sector, especially, and also in the aquaculture sector. And they need lots of help, they need guidance, and they need the department to stand behind them.
Pedro, I mean, thank you so much. You are a college of knowledge when it comes to small-scale fishes.
I don't think no. I think there's a lot of other people that have views and opinions.
Yeah,
good views and opinions.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I mean, good luck. I think it's going to be a busy. I think your time now is going to get much busier with the going towards FRAP 2021. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks.
No problem at all. Thank you, Miles, and have a good evening.
You too. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you guys for joining. That was Pedro Garcia of the Small Scale Fishers. Yeah, so hopefully last week I missed the interview because the work just got a bit too much. But next week we've got an exciting guest. I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but if you have any questions regarding the fishing industry or to any of the guests, previous guests, you can send them to me. I can always forward them to some of them because they're really keen to share some of their knowledge. You can see most of them are very knowledgeable in the fishing industry. That's why I thought it's so important to chat to them. So, but thank you so much for joining in on the conversation, and we will chat again next week. Thank you so much. Goodbye.